It was Emma's first week working the graveyard shift at Wendy's. The paycheck was decent and she had plenty of time during the day for college classes. But there was something unsettling about the store at night. The cheerful, brightly lit dining area felt oppressive in the darkness. The hum of the fryers and soda machines seemed louder, almost unnatural, in the absence of customers. Her co-worker, Jake, was an easygoing guy who had worked nights for years. "You'll get used to it," he assured her. "The weird noises, the flickering lights, this place has its quirks." Emma laughed nervously. "Weird noises?" Jake shrugged. "Yeah, just creaks and groans. This building's old. Oh, and the walk-in freezer? Try not to stay in there too long, the door sticks sometimes." She nodded, brushing off his warning as a joke. But as the clock ticked closer to midnight, a strange tension filled the air. Emma was cleaning the fry station when she heard it. A faint tapping sound. It was rhythmic, almost like fingernails drumming on glass. She paused, listening. "Jake, do you hear that?" she called out. "Hear what?" he replied, emerging from the storage room. "That tapping," Emma said, pointing toward the drive-through window. Jake frowned and walked over. The tapping stopped. "Probably just the wind," he said, though his tone wasn't convincing. Emma tried to shake off her unease, but the tapping returned a few minutes later. This time it was louder. By 1 a.m., Emma had settled into a rhythm, cleaning and restocking. Jake was in the back, prepping for the morning shift. The tapping had stopped, and she started to feel silly for being spooked. But as she walked past the drive-through window, she froze. A figure stood just outside, shrouded in shadow. "Hello?" Emma called out, her voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. It was tall and unnaturally still, its face obscured by the darkness. "Jake!" Emma yelled, backing away. Jake hurried over, wiping his hands on his apron. "What's wrong?" "There's someone outside," she said, pointing to the window. Jake peered out but saw nothing. "No one's there, Emma." "But I saw—" she began but stopped when she noticed the drive-through monitor flicker to life. The screen, which usually displayed orders, now showed static. Jake frowned. That's never happened before. The static cleared for a moment, revealing a distorted face staring back at them. Emma screamed and the screen went black. After the incident with the monitor, Jake decided to lock all the doors. "It's probably just a prank," he said, though his hands trembled as he turned the key. Emma wasn't convinced. Something about the figure outside and the face on the screen felt wrong. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Around 2 a.m. the power flickered, the kitchen lights dimmed, and the hum of the appliances faltered. "Great," Jake muttered. "Probably a power surge." But when the lights came back on, the drive-through monitor displayed a message. "Let me in." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Jake, what is this?" Jake didn't answer. He was staring at the message, his face pale. The lights flickered again, and the temperature in the kitchen plummeted. Emma could see her breath fogging in the air. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the empty dining area. "Someone's in here," Emma whispered, clutching Jake's arm. Jake grabbed a metal spatula from the counter, his makeshift weapon trembling in his hand. "Stay behind me." They crept toward the dining area, but when they rounded the corner, no one was there. The footsteps stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. The footsteps resumed, this time heading toward the kitchen. Jake and Emma rushed back, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. "We need to call the police," Emma said, grabbing her phone. But when she tried to dial, the screen went black. "The landline," Jake said, rushing to the office. Emma was about to follow when she heard a loud bang. She turned to see the door to the walk-in freezer swing open on its own. A deep, guttural growl echoed from within. "Jake!" Emma screamed, but before he could reach her, the freezer door slammed shut, trapping her inside. The temperature dropped rapidly, and Emma's flashlight barely penetrated the darkness. Frost formed on the walls, and her breath came out in frantic puffs. She pounded on the door, screaming for Jake. But instead of his voice, she heard the growl again, louder and closer. When Jake finally pried the freezer door open, Emma stumbled out, shivering and pale. "There's something in there," she whispered, her teeth chattering. Jake glanced inside but saw nothing. "We need to leave," he said. "Now." As they hurried to the front door, they heard a low, menacing laugh echo through the store. The lights flickered violently, and the drive-through monitor displayed another message. "You can't escape." Emma and Jake bolted for the exit, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if an invisible force held it shut. The laughter grew louder, and shadows began to gather in the corners of the room, coalescing into a humanoid shape. Just as the shadowy figure lunged toward them, Emma and Jake were blinded by a sudden flash of light. When they opened their eyes, the store was silent and empty. The doors were unlocked, the lights steady. It was as if nothing had happened. But when Emma glanced at the drive-through monitor, her blood ran cold. It now displayed an employee schedule, with her name listed under permanent night shift. Tyler had always thought working the night shift at Wendy's would be easy money. With fewer customers and minimal supervision, it seemed like a laid-back gig. When he arrived for his first shift, the manager, Mr. Crane, gave him a curt nod before retreating to his office. "He doesn't talk much," Sarah, another night shift employee, whispered to Tyler as they clocked in. Tyler glanced toward the office door. "Is he always like that?" Sarah shrugged. "Yeah, pretty much. He stays in there all night watching the cameras. I think he sleeps in there sometimes." Tyler chuckled. "Must be nice." The shift began uneventfully. A few customers trickled in, mostly late-night snackers or people heading home from parties. Tyler handled the grill while Sarah managed the register. Mr. Crane's office door remained shut, the faint glow of his desk lamp visible through the frosted glass. Around midnight, Sarah nudged Tyler. "Hey, do you hear that?" Tyler paused, listening. There was a faint sound, like someone whispering. "Probably just the fryer," he said, dismissing it. But as the night went on, the whispers grew louder, almost insistent. They seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. By 1 a.m., Tyler was starting to feel uneasy. The whispers hadn't stopped, and he could swear they were saying his name. He turned to Sarah. "Are you messing with me?" "What?" she asked, frowning. "You keep whispering my name," Tyler said. Sarah shook her head. "I haven't said a word." Before Tyler could respond, the intercom crackled to life. "Tyler, come to the office," Mr. Crane's voice said, low and gravelly. Tyler glanced at Sarah, who looked just as surprised as he felt. "Why does he need me in the office?" Tyler muttered, heading toward the door. When he stepped inside, the room was empty. The desk lamp flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "Mr. Crane?" Tyler called out. The intercom crackled again, this time with static. Then, a distorted voice whispered, "Stay where you are." Tyler's heart pounded as the office door slammed shut behind him. Tyler tried the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as the whispers grew louder, filling the room with an almost deafening hum. He turned toward the security monitors on Mr. Crane's desk. Each screen displayed a different part of the store: the kitchen, the dining area, the drive-thru. But something was off. On the monitor showing the dining area, Tyler saw Sarah standing by the counter. She was talking to someone who wasn't there. "Sarah," Tyler said aloud as if she could hear him. Then he noticed something else. In the corner of the dining area, near the entrance, stood a tall, shadowy figure. It didn't move, but its presence was oppressive, like it was watching. Suddenly, the figure turned its head toward the camera. Tyler's stomach dropped. Its face was featureless, just smooth, pale skin where eyes and a mouth should be. The figure raised a hand and pointed directly at the camera. At him. The office door swung open on its own, and Tyler didn't hesitate. He bolted out, rushing toward the dining area to warn Sarah. "Sarah!" he shouted, but she didn't respond. She was still standing by the counter, her back to him. As Tyler approached, he realized something was wrong. Sarah was unnaturally still, her head tilted at an odd angle. "Sarah?" he said cautiously, reaching out to touch her shoulder. She turned around slowly, her movements jerky, like a puppet on strings. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, and her lips twisted into a forced, unnatural smile. "They're watching," she said in a voice that wasn't hers. Tyler stumbled back, his heart racing. "Who's watching?" Before she could answer, the lights flickered, and the shadowy figure from the monitor appeared at the far end of the dining room. It glided toward them, its movements smooth and inhuman. "Run!" Tyler yelled, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her toward the kitchen. Tyler and Sarah burst into the kitchen, slamming the door behind them. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. "We need to get out of here," Tyler said, searching for the keys to the back door. But Sarah wasn't listening. She was staring at the walk-in freezer, her expression blank. "What are you doing?" Tyler asked, but she didn't respond. She walked toward the freezer, opening the door and stepping inside. "Sarah, no!" Tyler shouted, chasing after her. Inside the freezer, the temperature was unnaturally cold. Frost covered the walls, and the air felt heavy, suffocating. In the center of the room stood Mr. Crane. His eyes were black, and his skin was pale and cracked like old porcelain. "You shouldn't have stayed," he said in a voice that echoed unnaturally. Before Tyler could react, the freezer door slammed shut, plunging them into darkness. Tyler fumbled for his phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the freezer, but what he saw made his blood run cold. The walls were covered in writing, scrawled in what looked like blood. The words repeated over and over, "You can't leave." Sarah stood motionless, her head tilted back as if in a trance. Mr. Crane stepped closer, his black eyes locking onto Tyler. "You're one of us now," he said, his voice low and menacing. Tyler tried to back away, but the frost-covered floor was slick, and he slipped, falling hard. As he scrambled to his feet, he realized the whispers had stopped. Instead, a single voice echoed in his mind. "Welcome to the night shift." The lights flickered once more, and the freezer was suddenly empty. No Mr. Crane, no Sarah, just silence. Tyler staggered out of the freezer, but the store was different. The windows were boarded up, the dining area covered in dust. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, and yet on the counter his name tag gleamed, freshly polished. Megan had been working at Wendy's for years, but the corporate-mandated transfer to a new location rattled her nerves. This particular Wendy's, tucked into the corner of a run-down strip mall, had a reputation for being strange. Employees would quit after only a few shifts, and customers often reported bizarre occurrences. "Don't listen to the rumors," her new manager Carla said as Megan signed her paperwork on her first day. "This place has character." Megan forced a smile. "I'm sure I'll get used to it." Her first night shift started quietly enough. Megan busied herself with cleaning the fryers while Carla worked on inventory in the back. The place was eerily quiet, with only the hum of the equipment and the occasional beep of the fryer breaking the silence. At around 11 p.m., a strange smell wafted through the kitchen. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger, a mix of burnt oil and something metallic. Megan wrinkled her nose and checked the fryers, but everything seemed normal. "Carla," she called out. No response. Megan headed toward the storage room to find her, but the lights flickered, and a loud clang echoed from the kitchen behind her. She turned sharply, heart pounding. The fryers were bubbling violently, though they hadn't been turned on. The oil hissed and spat, as if something, or someone, was trying to climb out. Megan backed away from the fryers, her hands trembling. She reached for her phone to call Carla, but the signal was dead. A shadow passed over the fryer station, and Megan froze. It was faint, but unmistakable, a figure standing just at the edge of her vision. "Carla," she whispered, though she knew it wasn't her manager. The figure moved closer, and Megan's stomach twisted. It was humanoid, but its features were wrong. Its skin was charred black, and smoke wafted from its body like it had just walked out of a fire. Its eyes glowed an unnatural red. Megan stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a mop bucket. The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes locking onto hers. "You shouldn't be here," it rasped, its voice crackling like burning wood. Before Megan could respond, the figure vanished, leaving behind only the acrid smell of burnt oil. Shaken, Megan decided to wait out her shift in the front of the store. She figured Carla would return soon and they could leave together. At midnight, the doorbell chimed, signaling a customer. Megan was startled but relieved to see another person. A man in a tattered hoodie approached the counter. His face was pale and he had dark circles under his eyes. "Can I help you?" Megan asked, trying to steady her voice. The man didn't respond. Instead, he slid a crumpled piece of paper across the counter. Megan hesitated before picking it up. The note read, "Get out before they take you too." Megan's breath hitched, and when she looked up, the man was gone. The door hadn't chimed again, and there was no sign of him outside. Her hands shook as she clutched the note. She felt trapped, unsure of whether to leave or stay. Desperate to find Carla, Megan headed to the back of the store, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The storage room door was slightly ajar, and a dim light flickered inside. "Carla?" Megan called out, her voice trembling. Inside, the storage room was empty, but there was a trail of oily footprints leading to the fryer station. Megan's stomach churned as she followed the footprints, which seemed to shimmer with a faint, otherworldly glow. When she reached the fryers, the bubbling had stopped, but the air was thick with the smell of burnt flesh. Megan hesitated before peering into one of the vats. What she saw made her gag. Floating in the oil was a human hand, blackened and twisted as if it had been deep-fried. Megan stumbled back, her vision swimming. She tripped and fell, her head hitting the edge of the counter. As she faded into unconsciousness, she heard the same crackling voice from before. "You belong to us now." Megan awoke in the storage room, her head throbbing. Carla stood over her, her expression unreadable. "What happened?" Megan asked, struggling to sit up. Carla sighed. "I was hoping you wouldn't see it." "See what?" Megan demanded. Carla hesitated before explaining. "This store is cursed. Years ago, there was a fire in the kitchen. One of the employees got trapped and..." She paused, her voice breaking. "They didn't make it. Ever since then, strange things have been happening during the night shift." Megan stared at her, horrified. "Why didn't you warn me?" "Because no one would work here if they knew," Carla admitted. "I thought it had stopped, but I guess I was wrong." Before Megan could respond, the lights flickered and the air grew cold. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. "They're coming," Carla whispered, her face pale. The whispers turned into screams as the charred figure emerged from the shadows, its glowing eyes fixed on Megan and Carla. "Run!" Carla shouted, pulling Megan to her feet. They bolted for the front door, but it wouldn't open. The figure advanced, its footsteps echoing like gunshots. "This way!" Carla yelled, leading Megan toward the drive-through window. They scrambled through the narrow opening, cutting their arms on the jagged edges. Outside, they ran to Carla's car, but the engine wouldn't start. The charred figure appeared in the rearview mirror, standing just a few feet away. "Why won't it leave us alone?" Megan cried. "Because we're part of its story now," Carla said grimly. The figure raised a hand, and the car's window shattered. As the glass rained down, Megan screamed, the sound swallowed by the night. Tyler was a college student who had just started his part-time job at Wendy's. He needed extra cash to cover his tuition, and the night shift seemed perfect. Quiet, slow-paced, and free of the chaos of daytime crowds. The Wendy's location was old, with peeling paint and flickering lights that cast long shadows across the floor. Tyler wasn't one to believe in ghost stories, but his co-workers' tales about this particular location gave him pause. "Don't go near the freezer alone at night," warned Becky, one of the older employees. "Why not?" Tyler asked, laughing nervously. Becky's face grew serious. "Strange things happen in there. People say they hear voices, and sometimes things just disappear." Tyler shrugged off her warning. He didn't believe in ghosts, and besides, he needed the job. On his second night, Tyler found himself working alone. Becky had called in sick and the manager had left early, trusting Tyler to lock up. The night started smoothly, with only a few late-night customers stopping by for fries and Frosties. But as the clock struck midnight, the air grew heavy, and a strange chill settled over the restaurant. Tyler was restocking supplies when he heard a faint knock coming from the back of the store. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but the knocking grew louder and more insistent. He followed the sound to the freezer door, his breath fogged in the cold air as he stood there staring at the metal door. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing in the empty kitchen. The knocking stopped. Tyler hesitated, his hand hovering over the freezer handle. He told himself it was just the old building settling, but his gut told him otherwise. Finally, he mustered the courage to open the door. The cold air rushed out, making him shiver. The freezer was empty, but the boxes of frozen food were scattered across the floor, as if someone, or something, had been searching through them. As Tyler bent down to pick up a fallen box, the door slammed shut behind him. He spun around, heart racing, and grabbed the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Hello? Is anyone there?" he shouted, pounding on the door. Suddenly, a faint whisper filled the air, so soft he could barely make it out. "Leave!" Trapped in the freezer, Tyler's panic grew. His breaths came in short, sharp gasps, fogging up the air around him. He pounded on the door until his fists ached, but no one came to his rescue. The whisper returned, louder this time. "Leave. Now." Tyler spun around, trying to find the source of the voice. That's when he saw it. A shadow moving across the far wall. At first he thought it was just his own, but the shadow was taller and thinner, with unnaturally long arms that seemed to stretch and contract. The shadow moved closer, gliding across the walls as if it were alive. Tyler backed away until his back hit the cold metal shelves. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice shaking. The shadow stopped moving, hovering just a few feet away from him. Then, slowly, it began to rise, taking on a vaguely humanoid shape. Its face was featureless except for two glowing white eyes that pierced through the darkness. Tyler's blood ran cold as the shadow extended a hand toward him. "Get out while you can," it whispered. Tyler's fight-or-flight instincts kicked in. He lunged for the freezer door, yanking on the handle with all his strength. To his relief, it gave way, and he stumbled out into the kitchen. The cold followed him, and so did the shadow. It slithered out of the freezer like smoke, stretching along the walls and ceiling. Tyler grabbed a broom and swung it wildly, but the shadow was unaffected. The lights in the kitchen flickered and then went out, plunging the restaurant into darkness. Tyler could barely see, but he could feel the shadow closing in on him. Desperate, he ran toward the dining area, hoping to escape through the front door. But when he reached it, the door wouldn't open. It was as if an invisible force was holding it shut. "Let me out," he screamed, pounding on the glass. The shadow materialized behind him, its glowing eyes reflecting in the glass door. Tyler turned to face it, his back pressed against the door. "What do you want from me?" he cried. The shadow didn't respond. Instead, it lunged forward, enveloping Tyler in darkness. When Tyler woke up, he was lying on the floor of the dining area. The lights were back on, and the restaurant looked normal again. He sat up, his head pounding, and looked around. There was no sign of the shadow, but the air still felt heavy, as if the restaurant itself was watching him. Tyler stumbled to his feet and grabbed his phone. To his surprise, it was 6 a.m., the end of his shift. He had no memory of what had happened after the shadow had attacked him. As he gathered his things to leave, he noticed a piece of paper lying on the counter. It was covered in frost and the words were scrawled in jagged handwriting. "Leave now. Don't come back." Tyler didn't need to be told twice. He quit his job that same day, vowing never to set foot in that Wendy's again. But sometimes late at night he could still hear the whispers. Maggie had worked at Wendy's for years, but this particular location was different. It wasn't just the peeling wallpaper or the outdated equipment, it was the way the place felt after dark. The shadows seemed thicker, the air heavier, and the faint hum of the fryer sometimes sounded like whispers. Still, Maggie was a pragmatist. She'd heard the stories from her co-workers about strange noises, flickering lights, and equipment turning on by itself. But she chalked it up to an overactive imagination and an aging building. One night, Maggie found herself alone on the night shift. Her usual partner, Chris, had called in sick, leaving her to close up on her own. She didn't mind. Fewer people meant fewer distractions. Around 11:30 p.m., Maggie decided to clean the fryer. The process was tedious but necessary, and she found it oddly soothing. As she scrubbed the greasy surface, the kitchen lights flickered. "Great," she muttered, glancing up. "Just what I need, bad wiring." But then she heard it. A faint whisper just behind her. "Don't." Maggie froze, her heart pounding. She spun around, but the kitchen was empty. Shaking her head, she muttered, "Get a grip, Maggie. It's just your imagination." She turned back to the fryer, but the whisper came again, louder this time. "Don't touch." Maggie tried to shake off the unease as she continued cleaning, but the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, overlapping until they sounded like a chorus of disembodied voices. Suddenly, the fryer hissed. Maggie jumped back as hot grease bubbled violently, spilling over the sides. "What the hell?" she exclaimed, staring at the machine. It wasn't even turned on. As she backed away, the fryer's lid slammed shut with a deafening clang. The whispers stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the fryer itself. Maggie's breath caught in her throat as the fryer began to rattle. The lid lifted slightly, and a plume of black smoke poured out, filling the air with the acrid smell of burning grease. Panicked, Maggie grabbed a fire extinguisher and aimed it at the fryer. But as she pulled the trigger, the smoke coalesced into a humanoid shape. Two glowing red eyes appeared in the center of the black mass, staring directly at her. "Leave," the figure growled, its voice echoing through the kitchen. Maggie bolted for the door, but the smoke seemed to follow her, snaking through the air like a living thing. It wrapped around her ankles, pulling her to the ground. She screamed, kicking at the tendrils of smoke, but they held tight. The red-eyed figure loomed over her, its shadowy form shifting and pulsating. "Why are you here?" Maggie shouted, her voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it leaned closer, its face inches from hers. The air grew freezing cold, and Maggie could see her breath forming in clouds. "You shouldn't be here," the figure whispered, its voice like the crackling of burning wood. "This place is cursed." The tendrils of smoke tightened around her, and for a moment Maggie thought she was going to pass out. But just as quickly as it had attacked, the smoke released her. Maggie scrambled to her feet, coughing and gasping for air. The figure was gone, but the fryer continued to rattle, as if something inside was trying to escape. Determined to end whatever was happening, Maggie grabbed her phone and called the store manager, Mark. "You need to get down here now," she said, her voice shaking. "What's wrong?" Mark asked, sounding groggy. "There's something wrong with the fryer," Maggie replied, unsure of how to explain. Mark sighed. "It's just an old machine, Maggie. I'll look at it in the morning." "No," Maggie snapped. "You don't understand. There's something here. Something evil." Mark hesitated. "Maggie, are you feeling okay? Maybe you should go home and get some rest." Before she could respond, the fryer emitted a loud bang, and the phone went dead. Maggie stared at the screen in disbelief. The whispers returned, louder than ever. filling the air with an almost deafening cacophony. "Leave. Now." Desperate for answers, Maggie searched the store's back office for anything that might explain what was happening. She found an old box of documents, including newspaper clippings about the store's history. One article caught her eye. It detailed a fire that had occurred at the location years ago, claiming the lives of 3 employees. The cause of the fire was never determined, but the article mentioned rumors of a malfunctioning fryer. As Maggie read, the whispers grew louder, echoing through the office. She felt a cold hand on her shoulder and spun around, but no one was there. Suddenly, the fryer banged again and the lights in the office flickered. Realizing the fryer was the source of the hauntings, Maggie knew she had to destroy it. She grabbed a crowbar from the supply closet and returned to the kitchen, her heart pounding. The fryer hissed and rattled as she approached, but Maggie didn't hesitate. She swung the crowbar with all her strength, denting the metal surface. The fryer screamed, a horrible, high-pitched sound that made her ears ache. Black smoke poured out, forming into the red-eyed figure once more. "You can't stop us," it growled. Maggie swung the crowbar again, shattering the fryer's control panel. The figure let out a final, ear-splitting scream before dissolving into nothingness. The smoke cleared, and the fryer fell silent. For the first time all night, the air felt light and normal. Exhausted, Maggie collapsed onto the floor. She didn't know if the curse was truly broken, but one thing was certain: she was never working the night shift again.